The richest baby in the city was starving to death, and no one in that mansion could explain why. Machines hummed quietly in the corner of the nursery. A private neonatal monitor, custom-built for billionaires, flashed angry red numbers. In the crib, baby Oliver, 3 weeks old, born into more money than most people would see in a lifetime, let out a thin, exhausted whimper. He didn't cry like a normal newborn. He cried like he was running out of strength to ask for help. 48 hours without a full feed, the pediatrician muttered, scrolling through a tablet. All scans are clear, all labs are normal. He just refuses. His mother, Isabel, sat in a silk robe on the edge of the rocking chair, hair matted, eyes swollen. This was not the glamorous billionaire wife from magazines. This was a woman watching her child slowly disappear in front of her. "Please," she begged, voice breaking. "You said changing the formula would help. You said the reflux meds would help. Nothing is helping." Behind them, almost invisible in the doorway, a woman in a plain grey uniform clutched a trash bag to her chest and tried to be smaller than the shadow she was standing in. "Grace, I am 48 years old, black. Housemaid, the person in that room with the least power and the only one who couldn't look away." Dr. Klein sighed, the way tired doctors sigh when science runs out of easy answers. "We've ruled out structural issues. His heart, lungs, gut, they're perfect, but he's losing weight. If he doesn't begin to feed in the next 24 hours, Mrs. Harlow, we may be talking about comfort care." Comfort care. Those two words shattered the air like glass. Isabel burst into tears. Oliver let out a ragged cry that twisted something deep inside Grace's chest. The baby's fists opened and closed, opening, closing, as if grabbing at something that was never there. "Let's try again," the nurse said gently, raising the expensive, hypoallergenic bottle to Oliver's lips. The moment the silicone nipple touched him, his entire body went rigid, his back arched, his face crumpled. He turned away, screaming from a place too deep for anyone in that room to reach. Except, when he turned away, his eyes brushed past Isabel's shoulder and landed on Grace. For one split second, he stopped, just stopped. No scream, no arch, no fight, he just stared at her. Grace didn't move, she didn't breathe. She knew the rules, eyes down, mouth shut, hands busy. Still, she could feel it, his gaze locked on her like he knew something about her that nobody else did. Later that night, the mansion went quiet in that fake, expensive way rich houses do. No neighbors arguing, no car alarms. Just the distant ocean and the ticking of imported clocks. But from the nursery at the end of the marble hallway, the crying never stopped. Grace wiped down the polished banister for the third time, just to keep her hands from shaking. Every wail cut through the walls and straight into her bones. She had a baby at home too, 8 months old. Hungry cries were a language she understood better than English. On her way past the nursery door, she froze. Through the crack, she saw Isabel asleep in the rocking chair, head tilted back, mouth open from pure exhaustion. The nurse had gone to the restroom. Oliver lay in the crib, crimson-faced, fists flailing. And then it happened. He sucked in a breath, as if he'd smelled something. His tiny head turned sharply, away from the untouched bottle, away from the silk duvet, and toward the doorway where Grace stood. His cries softened. He made a soft, desperate rooting motion with his mouth. Grace's chest tightened. A strange, painful sensation spread under her ribs. Her body knew that signal. Her own breasts ached in response, a physical reminder that her milk hadn't fully dried up yet. She grabbed the cart handle tighter. "You're the maid," she told herself, "not the mother, not the doctor, the maid." But then she noticed one tiny thing no one else seemed to see. Around Oliver's lips, a faint, silvery grey shadow traced his gums, so light you'd miss it if you weren't close. Every time the nurse forced in a few drops of formula, that grey line looked a little darker. Grace had seen that strange colour once before, years ago, on her little brother in their old neighbourhood, right before the doctors said the word poisoning. Her heart started to pound. Was she imagining it? Was this just what rich babies looked like under expensive nursery lights? Or was something quietly, slowly killing this child while everyone stared at clean lab results? If you were standing in that doorway, just the help, not supposed to speak, not supposed to know anything, and you saw a baby fading in front of you, would you stay silent, or would you risk everything and say what no one wants to hear? And if Grace opened her mouth now, would anyone in this house of marble and money even believe her? The next morning, the mansion looked like a private hospital. White-coated specialists walked past oil paintings. ICU-grade machines blinked beside handmade Italian cribs. A nutritionist, a lactation consultant, and a neurologist all crowded around a baby the size of a loaf of bread. And Grace, she scrubbed the already spotless kitchen counters like the shine might distract her from the sound of Oliver's horse crying upstairs. She wasn't supposed to be near the nursery. That was a rule, Elena's rule. Elena Harlow, Daniel's mother, Oliver's grandmother, moved through the house like she owned the world, because in her mind she did. "Staff do not touch the baby," she had said the day Oliver came home from the hospital. "Staff do not give opinions. Staff do not linger." Grace remembered the way Elena's pale eyes had slid over her dark skin, pausing a fraction of a second too long, the way people look at a stain they can't quite scrub out. Now, as Grace polished silver she'd never be able to afford, she heard Elena's voice echoing down the hallway. "We pay for the best. Fix him," Elena snapped at Dr. Klein. "What's the point of all this equipment if he's still starving?" Dr. Klein kept his voice calm. "We are doing everything we can. He's not tolerating formulas. We can place a feeding tube directly into his stomach, but that's surgery. Risky for a baby this fragile." "A tube," Isabel's voice cracked. "You're going to cut into my baby because you don't know what's wrong. He will die without nutrition," the doctor said quietly. The words made the air go heavy. Grace's hand slipped. A silver spoon clattered into the sink. She caught a glimpse of herself in the polished fridge door, eyes wide, sweat on her forehead. She turned the faucet on full blast, pretending the noise would drown out the conversation upstairs, pretending she hadn't heard the word die. But when she carried a tray of coffee up later, the door to the nursery was open. Isabel sat on the floor, hair wild, hugging her knees, while ladies in smart suits whispered about second opinions and alternative therapies. Oliver lay in his crib, cheeks sunken, eyes half closed. He didn't even have the energy to cry. As Grace set the tray down, his eyelids fluttered. For a heartbeat, his gaze met hers again. Again, that flicker, that is reaching, like somewhere deep inside he knew her. "Leave it on the table," Elena said coolly. "You're finished here." Grace turned to go. But then Isabel's voice stopped her. "Wait." Everyone looked up. Isabel's eyes were wild, desperate. "Did you have children, Grace?" The room tensed. Nobody ever asked the staff personal questions. "Not really." "Yes, ma'am," Grace said softly. "One daughter. Did she eat? As a newborn?" Isabel's lip trembled. "Did you ever go through this?" Grace's throat closed. Memories flashed, her tiny baby in a crowded public hospital, wires everywhere, doctors shrugging because they had too many patients and not enough time. The way a neighbor's donated breast milk finally brought her daughter back from the edge. "She was early," Grace said carefully, with Elena's stare burning a hole in her cheek. "But once she got real milk, she got stronger." "Real milk?" Elena scoffed. "We have the most advanced formulas, Mother," Daniel cut in. "Enough." Grace backed toward the door, wishing she could shrink through it. But as she passed the crib, Oliver's hand shot out, clumsy, uncoordinated, and brushed her apron. His tiny fingers closed on the fabric and wouldn't let go. For the first time all day, a sound came out of him that wasn't a scream, just a soft, exhausted whine. His head turned toward her chest again, mouth searching. A hot, aching pressure spread across Grace's body. Her milk, mostly dried up these last months, responded like a match to gasoline. She felt a letdown, sharp and undeniable. Her body thought someone had just called her baby. Grace froze. No one else seemed to notice that small struggle between his hand and her apron. They were too busy arguing over brands of formula that cost more than Grace's monthly salary. When the nurse gently pried his fingers off and replaced them with a bottle, Oliver shrieked like he was being hurt. Downstairs, in the pantry, Grace leaned against the shelves and pressed her palms to her face. Her body wanted to feed a stranger's child. Her job was to scrub his floors. And somewhere in that mansion, Doctors talked about scalpels, and Elena talked about reputations, and nobody talked about the one thing Oliver's entire body seemed to be begging for. If stories where the smallest people spot the biggest truths hit you hard, subscribe now so you don't miss how this one unfolds, because what Grace is about to do next could cost her everything. That night, as the sun bled out behind the ocean, and the house fell into that strange, expensive silence again, Oliver's cries rose and fell, ragged and weaker each time. Grace lay awake in her tiny room above the garage, arms aching with phantom weight. How long before comfort care wasn't a threat but a choice? And when a baby's life hangs between your fear and your conscience, which one are you supposed to listen to? The next day, the decision came down like a sentence. "We are scheduling the feeding tube for tonight," Dr. Klein announced in the living room, his voice heavy. "We can't wait any longer." Isabel clutched the back of the sofa to stay upright. Daniel stared at the floor. Elena stared at everyone else, daring them to argue. Grace dusted a bookshelf that didn't need dusting, pretending not to hear, but every word landed like a stone in her chest. A tube, a knife. Into a baby who wouldn't even open his eyes anymore. On her lunch break, Grace sat on an upside-down milk crate behind the mansion, phone pressed to her ear. "They want to cut him open," she whispered. On the other end, her husband Marcus sighed. "Grace, it's not our problem. You clean their house, you don't run their life. He's a baby, Marcus, so is ours." She could hear their daughter cooing faintly in the background. "You get fired from that rich woman's house, how are we paying rent? Diapers don't buy themselves." Grace closed her eyes. She saw Oliver's limp hand, the grey line along his gums, the way he'd clung to her apron like it was a lifeline. "Do you remember when Soria wouldn't eat?" she asked quietly. "When they said she was failing to thrive?" Marcus went silent. He remembered. The hospital, the dismissive nurse. The way a stranger's donated milk had turned their daughter from blue to pink in 3 days. "You suggested breast milk then," Grace said. "The doctor laughed, said formula was scientifically superior, but he was wrong." "That's different," Marcus muttered. "Those people don't want your help, they want your silence." "But my body," she swallowed, cheeks burning even though no one was there to see. "When I get near him, I feel it, like my body thinks he's mine. Like it knows he's starving." "Then stay away," Marcus said softly. "Please, Grace, rich people don't forgive when help crosses the line." Her lunch break ended. The argument didn't. By evening, the sun poured gold into the nursery windows. Isabel sat in the rocking chair, Oliver in her arms, as 2 nurses prepped paperwork for surgery. "It'll be quick," one murmured. "He'll be fine." But nothing about the beeping monitor sounded fine. Isabel glanced up as Grace entered with fresh linens. "Not now," Elena snapped. "We are busy." But Isabel's eyes locked on Grace, full of raw terror. "You have children," Isabel whispered. How did you know what they needed?" When doctors didn't, Grace's throat burned. She wanted to scream the truth, that poor mothers learned to listen with something deeper than their ears, that nature designed solutions long before luxury brands existed. Instead, she said nothing. She set the linens down. The nurse stepped out to take a call. Elena followed Dr. Klein into the hallway, arguing about anesthesia risks. For a brief, fragile moment, it was just Isabel, Oliver, and Grace. Oliver started to cry, not the loud, angry cry from before, but a thin, hopeless sound. His head rolled against Isabel's chest, mouth searching uselessly at skin that never let down milk. Isabel flinched like she'd been slapped. "I can't even feed my own child," she sobbed. "My body failed him, my money failed him, what else is there?" Grace took one step closer, then another. "Mrs. Harlow," she whispered, heart pounding, I still have milk, a little. For my daughter, she's not fully weaned." Isabel looked up slowly. Her mascara had carved black rivers down her cheeks. Grace forced herself to keep going. "When I hold him, my milk," her voice shook. "I think he knows. I think he smells it, that's why he calms." The words felt like a confession and a crime at the same time. "You're saying," Isabel stared, "you're saying my baby wants your milk?" "I know it's not my place," Grace rushed, already regretting every word. "And it might not even help, But if he could just try, do it. The word came out of Isabel's mouth before her brain could stop it. Grace blinked. Ma'am, your mother-in-law is not in this room. Isabel's fingers tightened around Oliver. The doctors don't know. The surgeries, the tubes, we are out of options. If there is even a 1% chance that you can help him, I don't care what anyone thinks. Please, please. Her voice cracked on the last word. There are moments when your whole life narrows to a single choice. Grace felt it then, every fear, every paycheck, every rule, every racist comment Alina had ever made stacked on one side of the scale, and on the other side, a baby's fading heartbeat. Her hands trembled as she reached for Oliver. He was so light, too light. His head flopped back until she cradled it, pressing him against her chest the way she had done with her own daughter not so long ago. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Are you sure? Grace whispered. No, Isabel said, tears spilling freely now, but I'm sure he's dying. Grace took a breath that felt like jumping off a cliff. In one motion, she unbuttoned the top of her uniform, adjusted the thin nursing bra she still wore just in case, and guided Oliver closer. For a second, nothing happened. Then his nose twitched. His mouth opened. Instinct took over. He latched. Hard. A painful, shocking pull jolted through Grace's body. She gasped. Milk, precious, stubborn milk she'd thought was almost gone, let down in a hot rush. Oliver gulped. Once, twice, 3 times. The angry beeping on the monitor slowed. His fists unclenched. His entire body melted against her, as if someone had finally flipped the safe switch inside him. Isabel clapped a hand over her mouth, a sob ripped from somewhere raw and primal. For the first time since he'd come home, her baby was eating. If you walked into that room right now, if you were Isabel, and saw your maid breastfeeding your son, saving his life when all the doctors failed, what would you feel first? Horror, gratitude, or something you don't even have a word for yet? Tell me in the comments, because in this story, that answer changes everything. Out in the hallway, a door slammed. Elena's heels clicked sharply on the marble, growing closer. Grace held Oliver tighter, milk still flowing, as footsteps stopped right outside the nursery door. How do you hide the very thing that's finally saving a life? And what happens when the person who hates broken rules more than anything walks in and sees the biggest rule shattered right in front of her? For the first time in his short, fragile life, Oliver slept. Not the restless, miserable doze of a starving baby. Real sleep. Heavy, warm, satisfied. He lay across Grace's chest, his tiny hand curled around the edge of her uniform, milk dotting the corner of his mouth. The monitor by the crib showed smooth, steady numbers instead of frantic peaks. Isabel couldn't stop staring. He looks different, she whispered. He's pink. Grace didn't answer. She was afraid that if she spoke, she'd wake up from this impossible, rule-breaking miracle. The nursery door swung open. Elena stood there, lips already parted to scold. The words died on her tongue. Her gaze took in the scene in a single, devastating sweep. Oliver draped across the maid's chest, Grace's blouse slightly open, Isabel's tear-stained face. Silence swallowed the room. What, Elena said finally, voice so cold it burned, is going on in here? Isabel stood up so fast the rocking chair nearly tipped. Mother, wait, get my grandson off her. Each word landed like a slap. Grace's arms tightened instinctively. Every instinct screamed to keep him close, keep him eating, keep him alive. But her training screamed louder. She gently transferred Oliver into Isabel's arms. He fussed, searching blindly for the source of warmth and milk that had just vanished. Elena's eyes were ice on Grace's face. Out, she hissed. Now. Grace retreated to the wall, heart pounding in her throat. Mother, Isabel said, trying to keep her voice steady. He ate. For the first time, he took a full feed from Grace. No tube, no surgery. Elena stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You let the help put her body on him. The doctors couldn't fix it, Isabel shot back. She did. He is a Harlow, Elena spat. Not some charity case in a clinic. We do not mix. Mix what? Isabel demanded. The unspoken word, blood, hung between them, ugly and obvious. Elena's nostrils flared, but she didn't say it out loud. Not yet. Downstairs, hours later, After too many arguments and not enough listening, something strange happened. Oliver didn't crash. No vomiting, no screaming. He slept. He woke up. He rooted. He fussed when offered a bottle, then calmed when Grace held him near, fully clothed now, terrified of Elena's glare, but her body still flooding with milk every time he squirmed. By morning, the change was impossible to deny. He gained an ounce. His skin looked less like wax, more like a baby's. Dr. Klein scrolled through the overnight charts, eyebrows knit. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," he said. Isabel's eyes flicked to Grace. "It's skin to skin," she lied quickly. "We've been trying to make more contact, less equipment." Grace's stomach dropped. They were playing with fire, but Dr. Klein nodded. "Human touch can be powerful. We'll hold off on the tube for another 24 hours. 24 hours. Grace had just bought Oliver one more day of life. In those stolen pockets of time, when Elena was in a board meeting, when nurses stepped out to take calls, Isabel would close the nursery door and whisper, "Please." Grace would sit in the rocking chair, heart in her throat, and offer Oliver what no machine and no formula had. Living milk, laced with the memory of survival. He drank like he remembered starving. Nobody placed the word miracle on what was happening, not yet, but the fear in the house loosened by a fraction. Until gossip did what gossip always does. At the end of the week, a text message buzzed through the veins of the household staff. A blurry photo taken through the barely open nursery door, passed from one maid to another, to a driver, to a cousin, who just happened to work for Elena's personal assistant. The photo was grainy but clear enough. The maid, the billionaire's baby, a breast. 30 minutes later, Elena's car screeched up the driveway earlier than expected. The air in the kitchen thickened. Footsteps thundered up the marble stairs. A door slammed open upstairs, followed by a shriek of pure, wordless rage. Grace flinched in the pantry, milk soaking through the front of her uniform, knowing exactly what was about to blow up, and exactly who would be left holding the shrapnel. Stories where a single, risky act of courage changes everything are the heartbeat of this channel. If you want to see how far this one goes, hit subscribe so you're here for every twist. Back in the nursery, Elena's voice cracked like a whip. "You have disgraced this family," she screamed. "You have contaminated my grandson. Do you have any idea what you've done?" As Oliver woke and began to cry at the sound of her fury, as Isabel stood numb between her mother-in-law and the woman who'd just saved her child, one thing became brutally clear. Saving a life was only the beginning. The real battle over power, blood, and truth was just getting started. When love and prejudice collide over a crib, which one wins? And in a house where money buys everything except humility, whose word will matter when the screaming finally stops? Elena entered the nursery like a judge entering a courtroom, and in her world, she believed she was both judge and jury. "Put the baby in the crib," she ordered. Isabel didn't move. Oliver's cries shook her arms. His tiny mouth searched her shirt, frantic, remembering the one place he'd finally found relief. "Mother, stop," Isabel said. "You're scaring him." "I am protecting him," Elena snapped. "From bad decisions, from poor boundaries. From," her eyes cut to Grace, "from people who don't know their place." Grace stood near the window, back straight, palms sweaty. She wanted to disappear and fight at the same time. "I asked her to do it," Isabel said, voice shaking but clear. "She didn't overstep. I begged her to help, and she did." "Of course she did," Elena snarled. "Do you have any idea what she could ask for now? Money, favors, headlines, billionaires heir nursed by Maid. Do you want that all over the news? This isn't about headlines. It's about Oliver's life. He will have the best medical care money can buy," Elena snapped. "Not this. This saved him," Isabel shot back. "You saw him, you heard the doctors. He was dying, and now," Elena demanded, pointing at the fussing baby, "he is dependent on someone who can walk away whenever she wants. I will not have my grandson's survival tied to a stranger's breast." The word landed like a slap. Grace swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I would never, you would never," Elena cut in. "You would never take a photo, never tell a friend, never write a little story about the billionaire baby you nursed for a price." "I wasn't born yesterday. I didn't take any photos," Grace whispered. "I didn't tell anyone." Elena's lip curled. Lies come easy when there's money in the air. Mother. Daniel stepped into the room, tie loosened, eyes tired. He took in the scene, Isabel's tears, Grace's humiliation, his mother's fury. What's going on? What's going on? Elena said sharply. Is that while you were in meetings, your employee was playing milkmaid with your son? Because your doctors were planning to carve into him, Isabel snapped. Because nothing else worked. Daniel's jaw tightened. He stared at Grace. Is that true? Did you? Grace forced herself to meet his eyes. Yes, sir, with your wife's permission. He was starving. And now, Elena cut in, she thinks she owns a piece of him. That's what happens when you cross these lines. Oliver's crying rose to a frantic pitch, his face reddening, breaths becoming shallow. The argument roared around him like a storm. No more. Elena's voice sliced through the noise. From this moment, you are never to touch him again. You are banned from the nursery. You are dismissed from this house. Consider this your last day's pay. Isabel gasped. You can't just fire her. I own this house, Elena said coldly. I own the company that pays your credit cards. I can and I will. Daniel rubbed his temples. Mother, please, are you going to side with your wife's maid over your own mother? She demanded. Silence crashed down. Oliver coughed, a thin, desperate sound. Doctor. Klein hovered awkwardly in the doorway, caught between medical reality and family politics. With respect, Mrs. Harlow, whatever she did seems to have stabilized him. Perhaps we can formalize the arrangement. Screen her milk. Make it safe. Safe, Elena laughed, a humorless, sharp sound. I built an empire so my grandchild would never have to depend on scraps. I will not have him suckling at. Enough, Isabel shouted, voice raw. Say what you want to say. Say it out loud if you're going to think about it. The room held its breath, but Elena swallowed the word, choking on her own ugliness. She jabbed a finger at Grace. Out, pack your things. Security will see you off the property. Grace's vision blurred. Her heart pounded so loudly she couldn't hear the monitors anymore. She wanted to shout that money hadn't kept Oliver alive. Milk had, yours didn't, hers did. Instead, she did what she'd been trained her whole life to do in the presence of power. She nodded. She whispered, yes, ma'am. And she walked out. In the hallway, far from their eyes, she braced both hands on the wall and let one silent sob wrench through her chest. On her way downstairs, she passed the open office door where Dr. Klein stood with another doctor, voices low. It's strange, he murmured. He was stable all night. The second we switched back to formula, he started crashing again. We're missing something. Bad luck, the other doctor offered. Or bad information, Dr. Klein said. That night, Grace stood on the sidewalk outside the mansion gates, duffel bag at her feet, uniform still smelling faintly of Oliver's skin. Through the massive windows, she saw movement, nurses rushing, Elena pacing, Daniel on his phone. An ambulance's red lights washed the driveway in color as paramedics rolled a tiny stretcher toward the house. Her phone buzzed. A text from an old friend who worked for a community clinic, gray line on gums in a baby, metallic breath, we are seeing lead from imported remedies. Watch out for silver tonics. Gray line, metallic breath. Grace's hand flew to her mouth as her mind snapped back to that tiny shadow on Oliver's gums. The faint, strange metallic scent when Elena insisted on giving him vitamins from a crystal decanter before bed. It wasn't just that formula wasn't helping. Something was hurting him. If you were in Grace's shoes, fired, humiliated, standing outside in the dark with nothing but a suspicion, would you walk away and protect your own family or walk back into the fire for a child who doesn't even share your name? Whose life would you choose, your own or his? Oliver was back in the ICU, and the billionaire family needed someone to blame. News vans weren't outside. Elena had bought enough silence to keep them away, but the tension around the hospital's private entrance felt like a scandal trying to claw its way out. Daniel paced in the waiting room, phone glued to his ear, barking orders to lawyers and PR strategists. Make sure this doesn't leak, he hissed. If anyone asks, it's a routine procedure. Precautionary, got it? Isabel sat hunched in a plastic chair, face buried in her hands, while Elena stood at the window, arms crossed, radiating outrage. This is exactly what I warned you about, Elena said. You let the help cross the line and now look, infection, stress, God knows what she passed to him. He was dying before she touched him, Isabel whispered. He got better after. He got worse after you made her stop. Elena ignored her. A few miles away, in a cramped apartment that smelled faintly of boiled rice and baby shampoo, Grace watched the same hospital on an old TV with shaky news graphics. Sources say the Harlow family's newborn heir has been hospitalized again, the anchor said. No official word on his condition. Grace turned the TV off. Her own daughter, Soria, babbled in a playpen, cheeks full and shining, living proof that miracles sometimes came in the shape of another woman's milk. What's wrong, Mama? Marcus asked from the kitchen. He already knew, but he asked anyway. She sent him back, Grace whispered. Back to those bottles, back to those vitamins. That word tasted wrong now. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to the text her friend had sent. Grey line on gums, metallic breath, silver remedies, poisoning. The memory is unspooled. Oliver's grey gums, the faint tang of metal on his breath, the way Elena insisted on pouring a natural immune booster from a crystal decanter every night. She'd seen something like it as a child. Her brother's lips had turned that same stubborn grey before the doctor finally tested their tap water. What if he's being poisoned? She said out loud. Marcus froze. You don't know that. I know what it looks like, she said. I know how he smelled after she gave him that stuff. I know he only improved when she couldn't give it to him because he was on me instead. Even if you're right, Marcus said carefully, those people are not going to listen to you. You're the fired maid who broke their rules. They'll say you're bitter, you're vengeful. Let them, Grace snapped. If I'm wrong, I embarrass myself. If I'm right and I say nothing, he dies. The room went very still. Finally, Marcus nodded, jaw tight. Then you go, but you go smart. Not alone. Call that doctor, the one who looked like he actually had a brain. Dr. Klein. Grace's fingers shook as she dialed the hospital's main number and asked for him. Twice she was bounced to voicemail. The third time, a curt nurse said, he's with a critical patient. His name is Oliver Harlow, Grace blurted. I used to work in their house. He has a grey line on his gums and a metallic smell on his breath. Check his blood for heavy metals, for silver, please. I'm sorry, ma'am, you can't. Just write it down, Grace begged. Please, I know I'm just. She bit back the word help. I've seen this before. The line went dead. For a second, she wanted to throw the phone away. What did she expect? That a famous doctor would jump because a cleaning lady told him to. She stared at Soria, who stared back with serious, questioning eyes. Grace grabbed her bag. At the hospital, security stopped her at the VIP entrance. You can't go up without clearance. I used to work for them, Grace said. Please. I just need 5 minutes with Dr. Klein. A baby's life is on the line. Ma'am, if I let everyone in who says that, I'm not everyone, she snapped. I'm the reason he survived last time. Something in her voice, desperation plus a kind of earned authority, made the guard hesitate. He picked up a phone, murmured into it, then frowned. Wait here. 5 endless minutes later, Dr. Klein appeared, white coat wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. Ms. Carter, he said cautiously. I heard about what happened at the house. There's no time for that, Grace said. Doctor, you said you were missing something. That information might be wrong. I think I know what it is. His skepticism was obvious, but so was his exhaustion. Go on, she told him everything. The grey gums, the metallic breath. The crystal decanter Elena called vitamins, her brother's lead poisoning. The way Oliver improved only when he wasn't getting any of that and got worse the second it came back. He didn't just refuse the formula, she said. He refused anything in that bottle. He didn't refuse me. You said his tests were normal. Those tests didn't look like this. Dr. Klein's scientific brain clicked into gear. We screened standard toxins, he said slowly. But not for silver. No one uses that anymore except people who don't trust you, Grace finished. He took a breath, then another. Fine, he said. Decision made. I'll order a full heavy metal panel. And I'll ask security about that decanter. If you're the kind of person who believes one small voice can change the course of a whole life, make sure you're subscribed. Stories like this are exactly why we're here. Hours later, Dr. Klein stared at the lab report in his hand. Silver, elevated, along with traces of other metals, nowhere near the levels that would make an adult sick, but in a 3-week-old infant, devastating. He looked through the ICU window at Oliver, tiny chest rising and falling under tubes and lines. Behind him, a nurse said, "You should see this, doctor." She held up a zip-locked evidence bag. Inside, a glass baby bottle streaked with faint, shimmering residue. The label taped to it read, "Found in Harlow Nursery. Contents, immune booster prepared by grandmother." Who in this powerful family had decided they knew better than medicine? And when he walked back into that waiting room with the truth, which would shatter first, their denial or their loyalty to the woman who almost killed their heir? The poison wasn't in the formula, it was in the trust. Dr. Klein walked into the private waiting room with the lab report in one hand and the evidence bag in the other. Daniel looked up first, eyes bloodshot. Isabel followed, clinging to a crumpled tissue. Elena didn't turn from the window. "We found something," Dr. Klein said. The room sharpened. "What is it?" Isabel whispered. Is it something we can fix?" "Possibly," he said. Oliver had been exposed to elevated levels of silver and trace amounts of other metals. It's been accumulating in his system. "Silver?" Daniel frowned. "How?" "We use filtered water, BPA-free bottles, stainless steel." Elena turned then, slowly. Her expression shuttered. "That's absurd." Dr. Klein held up the evidence bag. "We recovered this from the nursery. A bottle with a residue consistent with colloidal silver solutions. An immune booster." The nurse said it came from a crystal decanter. "That rings a bell." Silence. Color drained from Elena's face, then flooded back, high and angry. "That's mine," she said. "I've taken that for years. My wellness doctor recommended it. It's perfectly safe. I put a few drops in his bottle, that's all." "To help, safe for an adult in small amounts perhaps," Dr. Klein said carefully. "For a newborn, it can be toxic. It interferes with nutrient absorption. It can irritate the gut, damage the kidneys. In Oliver's case, it's very likely a major factor in his feeding intolerance." "You're blaming me?" Elena's voice rose. "Because your expensive machines couldn't fix him." "I'm saying we finally have an explanation that fits the pattern," he replied. "He improved when the silver stopped. He crashed when it started again." "I was trying to help," she insisted. "When your people did nothing, I did something. I used what worked when Daniel was little." Daniel stared at her. "You did this to me too. I saved you," she snapped. "You were sick all the time, remember? The doctors said you'd always be weak. I found better answers." Isabel looked between them, horrified. "Is that what you call this? Better answers?" "It's not your fault," Dr. Klein said to her, then turned back to Elena. "But now that we know, it must stop, permanently, and we need to chelate the metals from his system. It will be a long road, but he has a chance." "A chance?" Isabel sagged into the chair. "He has a chance." Elena's jaw clenched. "You're turning my family against me with junk science." "Silver has been used for centuries, so has bloodletting," Dr. Klein cut in. "We stopped when we learned better." Something flickered behind Elena's eyes then. Fear, memory, guilt. She covered it with rage. "I'm calling my own specialist," she said. "We're not making any changes until I speak to him." "Mrs. Harlow," Dr. Klein said quietly, "this isn't a boardroom. This is an ICU. If this pattern continues, your grandson will die." The words hung there. In a different part of the city, Grace folded tiny onesies into a laundry basket, mind spinning. Her phone buzzed. Blocked number. She answered anyway. "Hello? It's Dr. Klein," said the voice on the other end. "You were right." Grace sat down hard on the edge of the bed. "About the silver?" "Yes. We've started treatment. I wanted you to know your observation may have just saved his life." Again, her throat closed. "How is he?" "Critical, but stable. We'll know more in the next 24 hours. She exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Thank you for listening," she whispered. "Thank you for speaking," he replied. "Not everyone would have." After he hung up, Grace stared at the wall. If Silver was hurting him, then her milk had done more than feed him. It had shielded him, diluting the poison, giving his body something to hold on to. She'd just been too scared of Alina to see the full picture. Later that week, the hospital arranged a family conference. To Alina, that meant family plus lawyers. To Isabel, it suddenly meant someone else. Before the meeting, she wandered through the halls, dazed. She paused in front of an old framed photograph in a seldom used corridor, one she'd walked past 100 times without really seeing. A young Alina, barely 20, hair pinned back in perfect waves. Beside her, an older black woman in a plain dress holding a baby. The baby was light-skinned with a halo of dark curls. The black woman's smile was small but fierce, like she knew this child more intimately than the girl standing stiffly beside her. There was something haunted in young Alina's eyes, something familiar, panic disguised as poise. Isabel leaned closer. "No plaque, no date. Who is this?" she asked a passing nurse. "Old family donation," the nurse shrugged. "I think that's your mother-in-law as a girl." The other woman, "No idea." Isabel snapped a photo with her phone, unease prickling. Why had Alina never shown them this? Why was this picture hidden in a forgotten hallway instead of on the mantel full of framed magazine covers and charity galas? At the family conference, Dr. Klein laid out the facts. The silver. The poisoning, the plan. Alina called it overreaction. Daniel called it a nightmare. Isabel called it something else, in the privacy of her mind. A pattern. That night, unable to shake the image of the young black woman holding a baby that clearly wasn't hers, but clearly was, Isabel snuck into the mansion's attic while Alina was still at the hospital. Dust danced in the flashlight beam as she pried open an old cedar trunk. Inside, letters tied with ribbon, a faded rattle, a bundle of baby clothes no one had ever told her about. And at the bottom, a brittle envelope with a name on it she'd never heard before, but one that made her blood run cold. Michael Harlow, she read softly, born 1968. Deceased 1969. If your grandmother-in-law had already buried one baby, and every whisper in that attic told you she might be repeating history, would you confront her and risk blowing your family apart, or stay quiet and hope you're wrong? And what if the only person who could help you understand the truth was the maid your family had just thrown away? The attic smelled like dust and secrets. Isabel sat cross-legged on the creaking floorboards, surrounded by papers that rewrote everything she thought she knew about the Harlow family. She picked up a brittle birth certificate. Michael Edward Harlow, mother, Alina Grace Harlow, father, name withheld. Her hand shook. Underneath it, a small stack of letters written in a looping, careful script. "Dear Miss Harlow," one began. "Little Michael is still not gaining. The doctor says he is failing to thrive. He cries day and night. I beg you, please do not give him any more of that tonic. It makes him worse." Isabel's stomach dropped. She skimmed faster. "I know your father insists, but Michael is not like other babies. He needs real milk, not tonics. When he is at my breast, he is calmer, but your family will not allow it when they visit. I am only the nurse, but I love him like he is mine. If they keep forcing that silver water on him, I fear I will lose him." The last letter in the bundle was different. Short, shaky, "Miss Harlow, Michael is gone." The doctor wrote, "Heart failure. I know in my soul it was that stuff your father called medicine. I can't stay here anymore. I hope God forgives us." The signature at the bottom made Isabel's breath catch. Lucille Carter, Carter, Grace's last name. The attic blurred. She pressed the heel of her hand to her forehead, trying to make sense of the impossible. Alina had done this before, to her own child, silver tonics. Ignoring a black woman's warnings. Burying the outcome under medical jargon and money. And the woman who had tried to save that long-ago baby, who had written these desperate letters, shared a name with the woman who had just saved Oliver. History wasn't just repeating, it was screaming. Isabel stuffed the letters back into the envelope, grabbed her phone, and took a dozen hasty photos of everything. Then she ran. At the hospital, Alina sat rigid in a chair by Oliver's crib, hands folded, as if posture could hold back the guilt seeping in around the edges. The chelation therapy had begun. Oliver's numbers were inching in the right direction. His skin looked less ashen, but tubes still spilled out of him like tangled lies. "Mother," Isabel said, voice cold as steel, "we need to talk, alone." Elena glanced at her, annoyed. "I'm tired, Isabel." "This isn't the time." "That's the problem," Isabel said. "You always say it's not the time. 50 years ago, you said it wasn't the time, and a baby named Michael died because of it." The name landed like a slap. Color drained from Elena's face. "Where did you hear that name?" "In your attic," Isabel said, "in letters from his nurse, Lucille Carter." Something like panic flashed across Elena's eyes before it hardened into anger. "You had no right to go through my things. You had no right to hurt my son," Isabel shot back, "and you had no right to erase your own." For a long time, the only sound in the room was the soft, mechanical sigh of the ventilator. Finally, Elena spoke. Her voice was small in a way Isabel had never heard. "I was young," she said. "My father arranged everything. He said the nurse was hysterical. He said the doctors knew best. He said the silver would make him strong. When Michael got worse, he said it was because that woman snuck him other things." "Milk," Isabel said quietly. "She snuck him milk. The thing that kept him going as long as he did." "I didn't know," Elena whispered. "I didn't want to know. When he died, my father said it was God's will. That's what you tell yourself when you have no power." "You had power this time," Isabel said. "More than anyone, and you almost killed him the same way." Tears slid silently down Elena's face. She swiped them away, angry at their betrayal. "I thought, if I did it right this time," she said, voice breaking, "if I used every connection, every remedy, every trick, I could make up for it." "You can't fix the past on the body of a new baby," Isabel said. "You can only destroy the present." On the other side of the glass, Dr. Klein pretended not to watch, but his eyes kept drifting to the older woman whose shoulders had finally slumped under the weight of truth. Later in the hallway, he caught Isabel by the arm. "He's improving," he said. "Slowly, his levels are coming down. But the damage to his gut feeding will still be complicated for a while." "What does he need?" she asked. He hesitated. "The one thing we know he tolerates, human milk, gentle, frequent feeds. And someone who can read his cues better than any machine." "Grace," Isabel said. "She understood something the rest of us missed," Dr. Klein said. "I've seen a lot of ICU miracles, Mrs. Harlow. Most of them involve a mother. Sometimes they involve someone who chooses to be. Even if that someone was fired," Isabel said bitterly, "humiliated, threatened. You can fix that part," he said, "if you're willing to stand up to your family." In the parking lot, under the harsh yellow glow of overhead lights, Isabel typed a message with trembling thumbs. "Grace, this is Isabel. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I need to see you. It's about Oliver, and something else. Please." She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. If stories of buried family secrets and second chances for courage speak to you, make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss how this reckoning lands on every person in this family. The reply came 10 minutes later. "Okay. Tomorrow noon, the diner on 5th. I'll bring my daughter. I don't go anywhere without her now." As Isabel slid her phone back into her pocket, she looked through the ICU glass at her son, fighting under the tangle of tubes. How do you ask the woman your family broke to help you rebuild what really matters? And when the truth ties her bloodline to your deepest family sin, what kind of apology could ever be enough? The diner on 5th still smelled like burnt coffee and fried onions, no matter how many times they updated the menu. Grace sat in a booth by the window, Soria on her lap, diaper bag beside her. She wore her cheaper uniform now, the one from the night shift she'd picked up at a nursing home when Elena fired her. Her eyes flicked to the door when it chimed. Isabel stepped in, out of place in designer jeans and a coat that probably cost more than everyone else's cars combined. She looked smaller without the mansion around her, just another tired mother with shadows under her eyes. "Grace," she said softly. "Mrs. Harlow," Grace replied automatically, then caught herself. "Isabel." They sat. For a moment, neither spoke. Soria broke the tension by reaching curiously for Isabel's necklace. "She's beautiful," Isabel whispered, letting the tiny fingers tug. You kept her alive when doctors didn't help, just like you did for Oliver. Grace swallowed. How is he? Better, Isabel said. Because of you, the silver, you were right, it was poisoning him. Grace closed her eyes. Relief and rage mixed in her chest. I should have fought harder, she whispered. I saw that grey line and I let her scare me into silence. You fought enough to speak when no one else would, Isabel said. That's why I'm here. She pulled the envelope of photocopied letters from her bag and slid them across the table. Grace frowned, opened them. Her eyes scanned the pages. Lucille Carter, she froze. My grandmother, she whispered. My mama said she nursed a rich woman's baby who died. She never said the name. She tried to save him, Isabel said, just like you tried to save Oliver. Elena's father ignored her. Elena ignored you. Babies paid the price both times. Tears gathered in Grace's eyes. She carried that guilt her whole life, she said. She thought maybe if she'd shouted louder, refused to listen, but they would have just fired her. Like they fired me. I'm sorry, Isabel said, for all of it, for what my family did to her, to you, to your mother, to your grandmother. They sat there, two women from two worlds, connected by a dead baby from 50 years ago and a living one fighting in a hospital bed. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Isabel said. I'm asking for help. The doctors need your milk, your instinct, your eye for the details they miss. Grace laughed bitterly. You want me to go back there, after what she called me? After she threw me out like trash? I want to pay you, Isabel said, properly, not as the help, as Oliver's wet nurse, his primary caregiver, with a contract, with protections, with respect. And I want to put something else in writing too. She slid another folded paper across the table, a draft of a trust document. At least $1 million for a scholarship program, Isabel said, for the children of domestic workers. In your family's name, starting with Soria if you'll let us. I can't fix the past, but I can change what our money does from here on. Grace stared at the paper. It blurred. Why? She whispered. Why would you do all this? Because my son is alive because of you, Isabel said simply. Because your grandmother deserved this. Because I am done letting Elena's fear and prejudice decide who matters. A waitress refilled their coffee cups, oblivious to the generational earthquake happening over the sticky table. If you go back there, Isabel said, you won't be going in as the maid. You'll be going in as someone whose judgment we trust more than anyone's, including my own, sometimes. Grace looked down at Soria, who had fallen asleep against her chest. Then she looked up at Isabel, at the tremor in her hand, at the hope in her eyes that looked like begging without pride. What if she tries to ruin me? Grace asked. Elena, she has money, lawyers. We have something she doesn't, Isabel said. The truth, evidence, letters with her name on them, doctors on record, and Daniel, she hesitated. He knows now about Michael, about Silver. He's angry not at you. You told him? Grace asked. We both did, Isabel said, with Dr. Klein there, he broke. I've never seen him cry like that. He said if our son survives, he doesn't want him raised in a family built on silence and lies. Grace let out a long, slow breath. In your own life, if you'd been disrespected and pushed out, but the child you'd risked everything for still needed you, would you walk back into that house? Or would you protect your peace and let the rich fix their own mess? Tell me in the comments, because the choice Grace is about to make says everything about who she really is. Finally, she folded the trust draft, slid it back across the table. I don't care about this, she said, not first. Here's what I want. What? Isabel asked. I want it in writing that Elena never gives that baby so much as a vitamin without a doctor's approval again, Grace said. I want her nowhere near his care plan. I want Dr. Klein to have final say over his health, not her money. And I want an apology, not because it changes the past, because Soria is going to grow up in this world, and I'm not going to let her think women like Elena always get to be right. Isabel nodded slowly. I can work with that. A few hours later, in a conference room at the hospital, the people who'd shaped Oliver's fate so far sat around a long table, Daniel, pale and shell-shocked, Isabel, steady and fierce, Dr. Klein, clinical and calm, Elena, rigid and defensive, and Grace, in her plain clothes, standing straighter than anyone. A lawyer pressed the record button. "Mrs. Harlow," he said to Elena, "we're here to discuss changes to Oliver's guardianship and medical decision-making based on new information about past and present events." "Past events are irrelevant," Elena snapped. "Tell that to Michael," Daniel said quietly, her head whipped toward him. As the lawyer began to read, as letters were placed on the table, as decades of secrets were dragged into fluorescent light, a picture formed. A girl who'd been too scared to defy her father. A woman who'd been too proud to admit she'd been wrong. A maid whose grandmother's warnings had been buried with her. When the lawyer finally said, "We're proposing that medical decisions fall solely to Daniel, Isabel, and Dr. Klein, and that Mrs. Harlow SR has no unsupervised access," Elena's chair scraped back. "You're all ungrateful," she hissed. "I did what I thought was right. Maybe it's time to try something else," Daniel said. Like listening, he turned to Grace. "Will you come back?" he asked, "as Oliver's nurse, officially, with a contract, with respect, with whatever you need to feel safe." All eyes fell on her. In a room where she used to be invisible, every breath suddenly depended on her answer. When the people who once ignored you finally beg for your help, do you give it freely, or make them feel the weight of every time they refuse to hear you? In that hospital conference room, 3 generations of Harlows, and one woman who technically wasn't one, had to decide what family really meant. Grace took a breath. "I'll come back," she said, "for Oliver, not for your name. Not for your money, for him." Relief washed over Isabel's face. Daniel sagged in his chair. "But I need 2 things first," Grace continued. "In writing today." "Name them," the lawyer said, pen poised. "First," she said, glancing briefly at Elena, "what we discussed. No unsupervised contact for Mrs. Harlow SR, no home remedies, no decisions about his body or his care without Dr. Klein's approval." "Ever?" the lawyer nodded, scribbling. "Second," she said, turning to Daniel and Isabel, "I want Lucille Carter's name on something in that house. A scholarship, a plaque, I don't care, something that says, 'This woman tried to save a Harlow baby when no one listened. I want her remembered as more than the help.'" Isabel's eyes filled. "Done." Daniel cleared his throat. "I agree." All eyes turned to Elena. She looked smaller somehow. Not because she'd shrunk, but because the armor she'd worn for decades had cracked. "You'd erase me from my grandson's life," she whispered. "No," Isabel said. "We are asking you to stop trying to fix your past on him. You can hold him. I love him, be his grandmother, but you don't get to control him or hurt him." "Not anymore." "You think I wanted to hurt him?" Elena demanded. "I watched one son nearly die. I buried another." You buried a baby you helped poison," Daniel said quietly, "and then you almost did it again. The difference this time is that someone refused to stay silent." He looked at Grace. "So this time," he said, "we listened to her." The lawyer slid the documents across the table, hands signed, pens scratched. History shifted, not because a law changed, but because a powerful woman finally lost her monopoly on what counted as knowledge. Later, in the ICU, Grace washed her hands at the sink, the way she'd been shown. She put on the thin hospital gown, sat in the chair by Oliver's crib, and waited as a nurse carefully detached one of the lines. "Ready?" the nurse whispered. Grace nodded, heart pounding. They laid Oliver across her chest, skin to skin. He was lighter than she remembered, but his eyes were clearer. He blinked up at her, confused, then curious. "Hey, baby," she whispered. "It's me again. We've both been through it, huh?" His tiny fingers curled in the fabric of the gown. Her body responded before her mind did. Warmth, fullness, a gentle ache. Milk, still there, still ready, still enough. With Dr. Klein's blessing and every protocol followed, she guided him gently, waited. He latched. This time, nobody burst through the door to scream. This time, nobody told her she was contaminating anything. This time, machines beeped a steady, approving rhythm as his heart rate smoothed and his oxygen levels held. In the hallway, Daniel watched through the glass, tears he didn't bother to hide tracking down his face. Isabel slid her hand into his. "You okay?" she asked. "No," he said honestly, but I think I will be. I can't believe it wasn't the specialists. It wasn't the money. It was her, Isabel said. Her and her grandmother. Inside, Grace rocked slowly, humming a tune her grandmother used to hum. A tune Lucille had probably sung to a baby named Michael once. In a room where no one wrote her name on a birth certificate, no one paid attention to the warnings in her voice. Now, generations later, that same song wrapped around a different baby in a different ICU, with doctors and lawyers and contracts finally catching up to what instinct had known all along. Weeks passed. Chelation cleansed Oliver's small body. Grace's careful feeding rebuilt his strength. The grey line on his gums faded. He traded wires for weight, tubes for chubby fingers that grabbed her hair and wouldn't let go. At home, a new plaque appeared in the entryway of the mansion, beside the Tasteful Art and Charity Awards. In honor of Lucille Carter, WHOSE Care and Courage SAVED lives, even when no one listned below it, smaller text, and to Grace Carter, who refused to let history repeat. Elena walked past that plaque every day. At first, she scowled. Then over time, she started stopping in front of it, fingers brushing the engraved letters of a name she'd spent half her life trying not to remember. Sometimes she'd stand at the nursery door and watch, Grace bouncing a giggling Oliver, Isabel reading on the rug, Daniel on the floor in a suit with a baby on his chest, looking more human than powerful. One afternoon, Elena stepped into the room, hands trembling. "May I?" she asked, nodding at Oliver. Grace looked at Isabel. Isabel looked at Grace. Finally, Grace nodded. "I'll stay," she said. "And you know the rules." Elena picked up her grandson, careful and awkward, like she thought he might break. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not sure if she was talking to Oliver, to the women in the room, or to a baby whose photo was yellowing in an attic. Grace didn't say, "I forgive you." That wasn't hers to give, not fully, but she did adjust Oliver's blanket and say softly, "We'll make sure he knows better, all of us." On discharge day, Dr. Klein handed Grace a file. "His chart," he said, "and something else. I recommended you to the board for a new role." Grace blinked. "A role, parent liaison," he said, "for families from communities like yours. Someone who can translate between medical language and what people actually feel. Someone who notices tiny details before they turn into big tragedies." She laughed, half in disbelief. "You want the maid to teach doctors? I want the woman who saved my patient twice to help save more," he said simply. As Grace walked out of the hospital into sunlight, Soria on one hip and Oliver nestled in a sling against her chest, the weight she carried wasn't just babies. It was proof that expertise can wear an expensive coat or a faded uniform. Proof that a tiny detail, a grey line on gums, a metallic breath, a baby's hand reaching for the wrong person can hold the key to life. Proof that listening to the people you're trained to overlook can change everything. In your own life, who have you decided doesn't know anything? Whose warnings have you dismissed because their clothes, their accent, their job didn't look like authority to you? Because sometimes the difference between another funeral and a child going home is whether we bother to hear the quiet voice in the corner saying, "Something's wrong." And if you want more stories that dig into those quiet voices, the ones the world almost ignores until it's too late, make sure you're subscribed so you'll hear the next time one tiny, overlooked detail changes a life forever.